We are talking about the race for mayor of the city of Chicago, and the Chicago Sun-Times a few days came out with the latest poll, and it shows Tony Preckwinkle in first place at 12.7%, Bill Daley in second place at 12.1%, Gary Chico 9.3%, Willie Wilson 9%, Susana Mendoza 8.7%. The rest of the field is all bunched somewhere around 4 or 3, and 25.8% are still undecided at this moment in time. Carol Felsenthal, nice to have you with us. You've been covering Chicago politics and writing about it for a long, long time. My question to you is 25%. That's a big number, and as you look at that poll, where is the movement in this poll, in your opinion, based on your reporting?
Well, I think, surprising to me, I think that the movement may be toward Bill Daley, which I thought, having written about a scathing article about Bill Daley when he dropped out of the governor's race, and I said he did it because he didn't want to stay in all those crummy motels downstate because he's such a, meticulous kind of man. I was surprised when he got into this race, but of course he can sleep in his own bed with his 1,000-point linens every night, so he's okay. But I'm surprised at that. The other thing that I'm surprised about the poll is when you read into it, if it came down to a race between Preckwinkle, a runoff between Preckwinkle and Mendoza, Mendoza beats her running away, even though Mendoza's further down that list. I think by 10 points.
Yeah. It's also an interesting thing is that I've been to about 4 or 5 of the mayoral forums. Bill Daley has only been at one of them, so he has been conspicuous by his absence. Shia Kapos also joins us. She's with Politico. Nice to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
What is your take? By the way, let me first of all say that if you're not a subscriber to Politico, you should be. Shia, you're the first person I read in the morning. So
I appreciate that. Love it.
I read you
I know you
first
do.
because I tweet at 4 in the whenever it is. I read
and
right
you get
away.
up earlier than I do, so okay.
I never go to sleep.
That's what I want to hear.
What is your take of where the movement is at the moment in this race?
Well, I think it kind of goes off of what Carol was saying. Everybody's first choice. This is the first choice when you look at the poll. If somebody says, "Who are you going to vote for?" That's my first choice. It looks like Tony's ahead, Daley, and it kind of goes down. But then now, let's say it goes to a runoff, and suddenly people realize, okay, I can't pick Amara or I can't pick Lori Lightfoot. So if it came down to a Tony and Mendoza beats Tony 43% to 35%. If it came down to a Daley and Preckwinkle, Daley beat Preckwinkle 40 to 38%. That was really surprising to me too. So it's going to be up to candidates to really try and woo these voters who are with the second and third tier candidates to get them on board. Because
you can't be too
matters.
rough on anybody right now because you're going to need them. I know I recently interviewed Willie Wilson, and I was talking about his conversations with Dorothy Brown because Dorothy Brown is at 4.7% in this poll. Again, she was knocked off the ballot last week. So that 4.7, I mean, that could go into a variety of directions.
And she has the church ladies. And I covered a forum when she was running again for the county clerk job. And it was in Lincoln Park at a church. And she was running against somebody who was a reformer, impressive person, a man, and her ladies showed up in this church on Fullerton, and they cheered her, and they loved her.
She's a very powerful speaker. She's really
and
great.
She has all the patronage people, all those people whose job and who put money in her Friday jean container.
Now, I talked to her last night. She is in a very powerful position, even with her little 4.4% here, because all the candidates are wanting to meet with her to get her support. So she's talking to everyone except one, and that would be Tony Preckwinkle, because Tony is the one that pushed and pushed and pushed to get her out. And
Willie
Dorothy
Wilson
remembers
said that he, he was initially challenging her as well, but he backed off. And when they talked, as I look at the field, obviously, I think Willie Wilson would endorse an African American, and he's one of the more conservative people in the race, as was Dorothy Brown. I mean, I think I would be dumbfounded if it doesn't go in that direction.
Their constituencies dovetail.
Yes.
But who knows? Maybe Dorothy sees something in Amara or Lori
Yes.
Lightfoot that we don't know about.
Right. Well, no, that's interesting.
My feeling, I interviewed Dorothy Brown, and when she told me about her upbringing and her desire to get a job with one of the big accounting firms, I think it was Arthur Andersen, and she said in the school that she was at, if your skin was dark and you were African-American, you had dark skin, you didn't get the interview with this accounting firm. And I remember going home and saying to my husband, you don't understand people until you walk in their shoes. I felt such a degree of sympathy with her, but I think that the person who has been most disappointing in this race and most surprising is Toni Preckwinkle. And I think she is a wounded candidate. And the question that I always have in my mind is that I follow politics like it's the most important activity of my day. Most people don't. And would have thought that Toni Preckwinkle would be running away with it. And then, of course, the Ed Burke stuff had.
But the Ed Burke
poll,
frankly, that's a time bomb for at least 3 candidates.
right? But for
Including
her,
Susanna.
Mendoza, because Mendoza was married and he was
Right,
playing
right.
the piano and singing songs to her, and she comes off as so inauthentic to me. I think she has a problem, but Toni Preckwinkle has no charisma.
Yeah, I don't know if that's the case. I do think she seems like she's feeling blindsided at every turn. Here she has all these, great plans, policy. She's a policy person. She has great policy proposals, and she comes out with them every day. And then what happens? Something new with the Ed Burke case,
But
She does come across, though, in these forums, and again, the forums I've been to, she always comes across as competent and professional.
of course.
But
yeah.
now,
And
when
more
you
so
hear
than
her,
more so than the others. I mean, the other person is Vallis. I mean, he'll give you a policy
right.
talk anytime you want. But again, he's one of those few in that race that isn't somehow tainted by Ed Burke to some extent.
Well, he's tainted by those soups guys, and I've been surprised that nobody really has gone back and looked
gone back
at
on that. Yeah,
the
that's a good
people,
point.
The people that Triple B, as Ram called her.
I'm going to make a note of that. That's
Yeah,
a good point.
and
yes.
but Toni Preckwinkle, I thought of her for many years as being the ideal policy wonk, honest candidate. And then when I was covering the race between Forrest Claypool and Toni Preckwinkle, was early in my blogging career, and I called Toni Preckwinkle thinking, of course, it was Barrios running against Claypool, and I said, so you're supporting Claypool, right? She said, no, I'm supporting Barrios. And I said, well, how can you support him? He's so obviously corrupt. And she said, because I'm a Democrat. Well, so much of what has happened vis-a-vis Ed Burke, hiring Ed Burke's son, and then having to admit that she had a meeting with Ed Burke, and Ed Burke says, my son's looking for another opportunity.
But here's the question.
That's damaging.
Does anybody get a sense? We may be outraged because we're journalists around the table, but does anybody get a sense that the public is outraged at Ed Burke and what's happening to Ed Burke and the closeness of all these relationships?
I think there's
Are
a
they fed
portion.
up?
Yeah, I think there is a portion of the community that really follows him within his ward that is outraged, or there wouldn't be competitors the way there are. The general public, I don't know.
Well, take a look at that poll. The poll asks, what are the issues that you're concerned about? Political corruption came in fourth after crime, after schools. It's the same deal that I go through all the time as somebody who lives and breathes this stuff, and the three of us at this table do. Most people, even really smart people, are plugged into national politics. This is just, there are too many people running, and
And it's frustrating for the candidates, too. They all want to talk. They want to talk about crime. They want to talk about education. Yet these Burke charges are sucking them in because they are all touched by it in some way. From one end, Toni Preckwinkle being anonymously named in the charges, to other people who have had relationships with them. And
Right.
I mean, you can't do business in Chicago without having a relationship with Ed Burke or Danny Solis.
Right.
Oh, the Danny's so
Danny's-
That's a whole other thing.
That's,
Right.
that's another whole bombshell. But the other question is, in looking at the candidates that are out there, is certainly in the most recent midterms, not only in this city but around the country, younger voters and the role of social media played a big part in a lot of these races. And I'm wondering if Amara Enya, who is focusing on social media and going after a younger audience, I wonder if this is going to be a test as to whether or not that works in a high visibility race. She's not doing well in this poll.
She is registering 18-year-olds, I hear, in college or in high school. She's doing a good effort at doing that. Will they come out to vote? I don't know.
In February.
Yeah, maybe. There are a lot of people, a lot of young people too, who are interested in Mendoza for the same reason.
Right.
But she's hurt most by the Solis stuff.
Yeah.
If dirt was spattered by that incredible story, most of it spattered on her, and the role of his sister, who's been somebody who I've wanted to write about for a
Fundraiser, yeah.
long
She's
time.
an interesting
She's
person,
in
yeah.
D.C., and she was Hillary's campaign manager until Hillary fired her.
Right. And there was supposed to be a fundraiser next week,
Right,
which has
that's
been
off.
canceled.
And the sister says, "Oh, I had to call it off because there was a death in the family."
It was her
just-
father-in-law, it sounds like, which
Oh, okay, so it's
which-
true. 'Cause
yes,
I read
yeah.
this stuff and I think, why do these people think that we're going to believe anything they say? But maybe I'm just
you
too
wonder
cynical.
maybe if it would have been held anyway, maybe,
right.
but there was a
But is-
family reason.
In looking, the name that I have not mentioned, and it's at these events, it's a guy who's always professional, he's always there, and that's Gary Chico, and he's doing fairly well in this poll, but he doesn't seem to have a lot of energy, at least in the public. I think his commercials are okay, but again, he's got a close relationship with Ed Burke as well, although
Right.
it goes back a long time.
He's great to hear speak. I don't know if you've ever heard him at the City Club. Or Mendoza or Tony Preckwinkle, actually. He has really good ideas. He's really sharp. He's somebody who could do the job. It's just it's the challenge that they all have of trying to capture that support that's trickling down to all those other candidates.
Mm-hmm. And it's going to be also, when you look at, what I've also heard is that within the wards in Chicago that mean a lot, one of the wards is still the 19th ward, and I understand that Jerry Joyce, who comes out of that ward, that he's very strong in that ward.
Sure.
And also, I'm getting 3 or 4 pieces of direct mail, and I'm a long way from his ward. And his father was Jeremiah Joyce. This is one of the great strategists in recent political history in Chicago. And obviously in this race, probably because he's ticked off at the dailies for something.
Well,
That's an interesting story. Do
he's,
you know it?
He was ticked off at Rahm Emanuel because Rahm Emanuel let go of Jerry's dad, who had the big
Right.
contract at O'Hare, and another Joyce ran 4 years ago, didn't get very far. Now you have Jerry Joyce running, and there's thinking that the family might have been upset that the Dailies supported Rahm in letting Joyce Sr. go.
Right.
He says he's not running for that reason. He's running because he wants to, do right by the city,
yeah.
and he's
Chicago great
campaigning.
again.
He is kind of an underdog, campaigning quietly. I know he's been holding little soirees in people's homes all across the city. It doesn't seem to be showing in this poll that he's making any penetration, but I don't
But
know.
the thing that interests me is that with all of the political experts that are behind each of these candidates, I don't think there's one that's got the history and the depth and the ability as Jeremiah Joyce did for many years, because he was the closest guy to Richard M. Daley. He and Tim Degnan were the guys that got Rich Daley elected.
But he's not running his son's campaign.
No.
He's in Florida, so
Right. But I'm sure he's got some input into it.
yeah, that
So
could be.
you'd have another dynasty. The idea of Bill Daley becoming, my whole life, practically, I'm born in 1949, so 1955, Richard J. becomes mayor. And I don't, Bill Daley is not a roll up your sleeve and break a sweat kind of guy. When I was writing a book about Bill Clinton, and I interviewed a person who had been campaign manager when Daley was running the Gore campaign, which he really messed up. He messed up the campaign, and they moved the campaign office to Nashville, Tennessee. They got out of, they wanted to look like they were going to be with it. Donna Brazil was the manager. She was working for him.
That's
Said
right.
Daley was like a banker. He came in at 9 o'clock, perfectly dressed, white shirt, tie. At 5 o'clock he left. Everybody else was, eating pizza and, pouring Coca-Colas over their heads. And he was just, he has that kind of, he's more of a...
The only one
he's a
who still had a suit at the Osama bin Laden raid. He's in that picture at the White House.
In that picture,
Everyone
yeah.
else has got their sleeves rolled up. But
Yeah, that's so...
But when you
tie-in,
hear him, I heard one of the first ads he had was a voiceover, and someone was saying, you got to get Bill Daley's own voice on those ads because he sounds like a regular Chicago guy.
He sounds like a
doesn't
Chicago-
he doesn't sound like a banker. He sounds like Chicago, and if people really hear him, they might
be attracted to
they'd
that.
be attracted to that.
Unlike the police commissioner, whose name is
Gary McCarthy.
Yeah, who has a really strong New
Bronx.
York accent.
His-
He's not going anywhere. I don't think
Right.
and he has Laquan McDonald being wrapped
That's hanging
around
over
his
him,
neck.
That's
right.
going to be tough for him to get around that. Although, he was the one, again, I interviewed him recently for this series, and he was the one that basically threw Paul Vallis under the bus, saying that Paul Vallis is really responsible for all the, the sexual charges against what's happening in the Chicago public schools. And which you don't get any of that at these forums. Nobody challenges anybody at the forum.
Because they're not debates, they're forums.
They're not,
yeah.
but still, nobody's doing anything to try to steal votes from somebody else because they're worried that they're in the same lane.
But
And that's
when
what you've got to do right now.
When you look at this race, it is a whirlpool of political news, and each one of these candidates is trying to, get that not the Velcro, the what Reagan had, where it just sort of the Teflon,
Right.
where dropping, and they can't do it, and then they come out with a statement like Susana Mendoza said that she had to return, what was it, 141K, and she had to return it because of her values, her value system, and you read that and you think that's ridiculous.
Though that's
Just-
what Tony said too when she had to return her money
Yeah.
from Burke, right? I don't
Right,
know.
but she didn't know Ed Burke at all. She only knew his
Carol
wife.
Felsenthal, thank you very much for being with us. Shia Kapos, thank you very much for
Thank
being with
you.
us. And as I mentioned, if you're not subscribing to Politico, you're missing what's happening in the city of Chicago. And also, there's a national Politico to find out what's going on in the country as well. Thanks very much for being with us as we've taken a look at the mayor's race in the city of Chicago.